Okay, so now let's look at one of the design goals. I'm just trying to give you some overview on what if you want to do sensors, what kind of problem you're gonna run into. So how to reduce the power, how to slow down, drain this pitcher of water. The first thing, okay, you see a complicated table. Don't worry, I'm gonna walk you through it. So basic idea is I have a sensor which has CPU, have radio, have sensors, and also flash memory. So how can I reduce my power consumption? The first thing we want to understand is which component they drink up water a lot faster than others. Then we try to train it not to do that, behave. Don't drink so much water, right? So for the flash memory, I didn't put here. So for the flash memory, most of the time we turn it off because inside CPU, there are some internal memory. Most of the time, the CPU can still hold the data. Only in very extreme case, we'll have to store data in the flash memory. So let's look at some number for CPU. The CPU consume 13 milliamp. So what is this? So let's see. If your fridge have probably your fridge consume probably like 2 or 3 amps. That is how many times difference? Like 500 times. Or your computer, it's actually most of the time your computer consume at least like 2 amps. So this thing is already so much more efficient. But if we let the CPU run all the time and using 2 AA batteries, then the thing can only last for 72 hours. That's no good. Because when we deploy those sensors, we have to drill holes on the rock, put epoxy to glue the sensor there after like hours of work, and they can only last for 92 hours. Ellie won't be happy. She'd rather go out 3 months, once every 3 months to collect data instead of drilling holes every like 3 days. That's not good. And now let's look at the wireless communication component, the RF. They consume a lot of energy too. So on average, so when we transmit and when we receive, the amount of energy consumed is different. So they're on the order of 100 hours. And then the last thing is sensor. Sensor is the only thing that behaves, right? The current draw is less than 1 milliamp, so it can last up to 50 days. So, okay, here's the portfolio. Now, what we're gonna do? We're gonna look at CPU first. You are the bad boy. Let's see, what can you do? Well, let's think about, let's say, a homeless who has no food, not much food. How can he sustain his life a little bit longer? Sleep most of the time, right? If you're asleep, you don't consume so much energy and you don't feel hungry and you don't have to eat. We can do the same thing to a CPU. So with CPU, when they're active, they can only last for 3.8 days. But when they're sleeping, we only need to provide them with the minimum power. So that's 35 microamp. And they can last to 4 years. We don't need sensor to talk, to do things all the time. We only need to measure temperature once every 5 minutes or 10 minutes. So for the rest of time, they should just sleep. So that's the idea. So you can think about the sensor. They're active 5% of time. They're running. And then they immediately go to sleep, 95%. And they do this in cycles. Well, as humans, we do that too, but we don't sleep 75% of time, although I wish I can some days. So I have too much to do. I have too many graduate students. I need to get rid of them. Okay, so that's the duty cycle. And you can imagine this is 5% active at a time. And if we reduce the uptime, the wake time to 1%, then we can actually do things. So here's the calculation with the same current draw. So if CPU is active, only almost 4 days, sleeping 4 years. If we can do something in between, and then we get to almost a year. So when the sensor is sleeping, it does nothing. So now we let the sensor do work at the same time. They can last for a longer time. So okay, that's cool. Here's a few pictures of the sensors we designed. So we actually designed more generations than these. This one is the first batch we've done. For this batch of sensor, we use a CPU that drink water a little bit faster than we would like. So we removed it and we replaced the CPU here. And from this point to that point, we just try to reduce the size of the circuits and try to make the circuits more efficient. We did a little bit tune. So that's how to reduce the power consumption. So we increase the lifespan of the sensor from 4 days to almost a year. Now that's the CPU. Now let's look at, is there any other thing we have to worry? That's actually the communication. During low tide, when the sensors are exposed to the air, everything works normally. They can form a network, but when there's a high tide, when the water comes, now those two buddies, they used to be able to communicate. Now because they're seawater, so they actually cannot. At this time, imagine that it's like what happened right now. I know some of you are sleeping. So, and maybe submerged by water, right? Even if I shout so loud, you won't be able to hear. At that time, I probably should just shut up and waste. Why I waste energy, right? It happens a lot in the classroom. You see students are sleeping. I really want to stop talking, but there's just one guy still awake. And okay, so anyway, so this is actually the situation in the intertidal zone as well. Someone is underwater, they can't hear you. Luckily, what happened in this scenario is if there's water, most of the sensor will be underwater. So everybody can just shut up. So there's scenario. So we have to have this feature for each sensor. I have to figure out whether I'm underwater or not. If I'm underwater, I shouldn't transmit any data because that's just wasteful. No one's gonna hear it. So what we've done, okay, so save energy at IFN. So one thing to save energy for the communication is don't send and just turn off the IF when the whole sensor is in the sleep mode. And the second is try to detect whether I'm underwater or not. So how to do that? We use electrodes. So it's basically two metal wires sticking out of the sensor. So this is actually, it's hard to see, but those two white dots, there are the electrodes that's sticking out. So we measure the connectivity between those two wires. Now, in the air is not a conductor. So the resistor, oh, I'm using terms. So basically, they're open. The resistor is huge. But if the sensor is underwater, the seawater is a conductor, then the two electrodes are shorted. So we can measure that and then detect what's going on. This is nice, except there's one effect called electroplating or erosion. So basically, if I apply current or voltage between those two, this is what happened after 30 minutes. This portion is gone. I didn't bite it off. It's really just happened when we stick it into seawater. So we try to find materials that works. We tried two materials. This is copper and this is nickel. And we actually placed those two in the ocean for 3 months. That's what happened after 3 months. So this shows that copper is not a good material, but nickel seems like workable. So now we basically solved the low power problem. The communication is down. Now the sensor knows when to communicate. So we have some little working prototype. And we're getting closer to have the data in real time. So that part is actually marine sensor for Brian. Since Brian said I am very dangerous, so I decided to tell you something on what I do in my other time, in my second life. We okay. So let me tell you what's going on in this picture. So we're trying to fool the Bluetooth microphone. So basically, we're thinking all those sensors, they report data, but are the data they reported trustworthy? Can I do something so, let's say Bluetooth is recording environmental sound, but it records something that never exists in the environment. So we actually call this ghost talk. So I know the Halloween is coming. If you want to trick your friend, I can tell you how to do it. So basically, this is the microphone. It's recording the environmental sound, and it's paired with this computer. And we have this bad guy sending out wireless signal. It's like an evil signal. And the signal is not audible. It's in a really high, let's 800 megahertz. We know human can only hear up to 20 kilohertz. So I'm going to play what's being recorded. Actually, for the whole time, there's only one person, one guy talking in the environment. This is what you can hear in the environment, but the microphone actually recorded music. So that's why this is perfect game during Halloween, right? Call your friend, and then you set up the whole thing in the back, and then your friend suddenly, where's the music come from? How can I hear the music? We didn't stop on there. We actually tried something else. Oh, this is not real. Okay, I should warn you. You just had pizza, right? Okay, you. This is a synthetic cadaver. So what we've done is actually try to test whether we can trust implantable pacemaker. So what pacemaker does is it's gonna monitor your heartbeat, not yours. Some old guy's heartbeat. If their heart stopped, then the pacemaker will just send out a very small pulse to basically boot the heart, to let the heart beat. For each electric pulse, the heart gonna beat once. So it's very important for the pacemaker to detect there's no heartbeat, like in this scenario, right? So the pacing signal should be always there. So what we've done is we send out some fake signal over the air, and this is actually what's recorded by the pacemaker. This is the green word actually means think ventricular pacing, which means up to this point, the pacemaker is doing its work because this is a synthetic cadaver. It needs pacing. Hopefully, the heart can reboot. And then immediately after we start transmitting the signal, you see actually there's some signal here similar to what I show here, which means that the sensor is picking up some wireless signal from the environment. And what happened next is those letters turn into purple. It said ventricular sensing, which means the pacemaker think this cadaver has a heart that's beating. Well, we only do it on synthetic cadaver. We never tested on a live person. Although I have one friend who has a pacemaker, I always try to talk him into that. He never agreed. But this is just an example to show you that sensors are not really trustworthy. Although the robo sensor Brian has is totally trustworthy. Well, I guess we actually. And this is just one of the things we're doing. I skipped a part where there's a called defibrillator. It will sense arrhythmia in the heart, and once the arrhythmia is sensed, then the defibrillator is going to shock the patient. We actually tested that too. And one of the students actually didn't follow the protocol properly, so his finger was bleeding one day I saw because apparently he shouldn't have done that. We triggered something. I'll just stop there. Anyway, so here are a few students. They're working on Brian's project. So these kids are trustworthy. They never played with pacemaker or any anything. So Miao is in the back, and Xingyan is in China, and Xiaopen also is in the back. So if you are interested in more about sensor, you can talk to them. They know more than I do. I'm just showing you this, and that's it. Okay, so I'm done.